Greetings to this bonus episode of the Rereading Wolfe podcast.
Another bonus. So quickly.
Yes, this is going to be an all bonus episode before you know it. So we got a chance to talk to Michael Andre-Driussi and about his upcoming book, Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, a Chapter Guide.
Which we think is a marvelous idea, to do a chapter by chapter review.
Yeah. Someone should have thought of that.
But this was really fun for us. I know, James, you've gotten to meet him before, but I've never gotten to meet him or speak to him before, so that was kind of a thrill for me because he was the first Wolfe scholar that I knew. Like I think I say when we talk, he opened this up to a lot of people and really made Wolfe accessible to a lot of people who might have read it once but not really come back to it in a whole lot of detail. But he really kind of paved a lot of ways for people to really dig in.
Yeah, the Lexicon Urthus is definitely a gift that keeps on giving,
Indeed.
even after all these years. And I don't know if anyone's ever checked out his similar guides for the Book of the Long Sun, the Book of the Short Sun, for the Wizard Knight. They're also really, really useful.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, his serious fiction, that little thing. And then they wrote about other authors too, who, which is a great thing to get extra scholarship on genre writers, because still there's just not a whole lot. There's more and more as time goes on in a few major journals, but there's less than I would like there to be. So it's great.
Yeah.
Great to have more people doing it. So next time we'll be back on track with the next chapter, with chapter 7. But for now, we're going to head over to talk to Michael. I hope you enjoy it.
All right.
Well, good. Well, I'm Craig, by the way. It says Weird Christmas, but
that's just what we call him.
That's
Can I just call you weird?
that's another thing altogether. Well, it's great. I mean, I'll admit I'm slightly starstruck just because I have been reading your stuff forever. So
well, and I do remember you. Of course, I don't recall meeting you in person. I've met James a few times, but I do remember you from the list. So
great. Yeah, I wasn't super active on there. James was way more active than I was, but no, I was one of those long-term lurkers who would occasionally show up. But no, that was one of the. I was on there back. I think I joined not long after everyone picked Long Sun names, so I just missed that cut.
Yeah.
When you first arrived on the Urth-list, how long had it been going on?
You're asking me?
Yes.
How long had it been?
Because you were there before either of us, so.
Well, I don't know how much longer it had been going on. I mean, that's the funny thing about it. I kind of allude to that at the beginning of this new book. I can be a little bit more. The thing is, Alice talked me into it. I wasn't really that interested in
Alice K. Turner. Right?
Alice K. Turner. That's right. I had just come out of the genie thing had gone away, and I had published the book and everything. So I wasn't really looking for another community like that. But Alice is the one. She found it and she said, "Hey," and I was like, I don't know. And she's like, "No, really." And I'm like, She really kind of pretty much twisted my arm, and the rest is history, because it turned out to be a much bigger place than the genie experience had ever been, and it turned out to be a really great thing. But yeah, I admit full up front that I was very, very skeptical and resistant to the idea of it, and she just dragged me.
I don't want to hang out with people. If I get on the list, there'll be people and they'll, talk to each other. That would, what a drag that can be. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of when you must have come on. You must have come on like what, 97, 96, something like that.
Okay. Hang on a sec. Hang on. I'll get, okay. I did make some notes at the beginning of the book. Okay, so according to this book that I just finished writing.
Well, who knows if it's accurate?
Yeah, right. This is clearly an unreliable narrator. She talked me into joining it, and that was in 97.
Well, so what we were thinking tonight was we just really kind of wanted to chat. Yeah, so I think what we really thought we could do is, if you're up for it, talk about the book.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, it is a chapter guide, and so the idea was kind of to take the synopsis and use that as a certain skeletal structure and also talk about literary tidbits here and there, things that I wasn't able to use for the lexicon, but are still kind of rattling around in my head. Kind of how it, between the initial plan and what I actually did, and then how it changed as it went, that's its own thing. But that's what it is pretty much. And I did want it to be eventually. Initially, I thought it was going to be really just, pure hardcore, like spoilers all over the place. But then I backed off on that because I felt that's too much like the lexicon, and I wanted it to be just different from that. So I wanted it to be something that people could, as a first time reading through, as they read a chapter or two, then they could read, this. Or it could be, if people who've already read the series a couple times, they could just read this through straight and go like that. So I don't know if that's going to work out, but that was the idea, to try to appeal to both audiences at the same time. And that is kind of risky, but
that's great. So is it organized more like little essays on each chapter, or is it a bit more like annotation? Or
yeah, it's more like annotation. So first, at the beginning of the chapter, it's the synopsis of the whole chapter, and then after that is basically annotation in order that it comes.
Yeah.
So those are like little entries, and they develop a certain pattern, like biblical, Bible, or history, or something like that. So there, or Dickens for Charles Dickens, or Mark Twain, Melville, that kind of thing. So
great.
So for chapter 1, start off with the synopsis, and then actually talk about the chapter title. And I get into what you guys were covering, which is that the phrase has that reversal. So talking about how resurrection and death, where it's usually death and resurrection, and also pointing out that the resurrection is body snatching,
right?
Term for body snatching, and that the death is of the 2 volunteers trying to prevent the grave robbing. And then myth. So then I talk about Gule, and then Melville, talking a little about Melville, and then Mark Twain, talking about how the boys are doing when Droat does that con job with the volunteers. I feel like that's just straight out of Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
And then I point out that later on in Tom Sawyer, there is a pivotal scene in a graveyard. So I talk about that a little bit, because that's when Tom and Huck, going into the cemetery, they wanted to perform the experiments with a dead cat, but then they come upon these 3 guys who are just robbing a grave. It's like, wow, that's really quite similar to what we have here, kind of thing. But then another entry on Dickens, because of course that's also like the beginning of Great Expectations, and then talking about the paradoxes to perfect memory, like which boy is the one who said, "Wait, I see pikes," that whole thing. And then talking about the animal form, because Thea's voice is likened to a dove, so she's described as a dove, while the heavy man is a kind of a cave bear.
Well, as you know, that dove drives me crazy, because I keep wanting that to be so much more, to mean so much more.
Yeah. And then some commentary, and then finally the last one for that chapter is just talking about Robert Graves with the whole I Claudius kind of thing. So now that's just that first chapter, and that's a fat one. Some of the entries are pretty slim. Sometimes it's so thin that there really isn't anything but just the synopsis of the chapter. Sometimes they get pretty thick like that.
Well, that's great. I was always wondered when someone was going to work on an annotation, and it sounds like you have. So, yeah.
That's exactly what I've wanted. I want every one of his books that'll be fully annotated on the side. Like, what were those large sized books in children's libraries of all the classics, and from the 19th century, and over on the side you'll have definitions of all of the words as you go on. Since we've begun this, you've been sending us emails
from time to time.
Yeah, from time to time, and when you do, you'll have like a little explanation of terms or concepts. Is it more like that, or is it more like, say, the commentary sections in Lexicon Urthus?
That's a good question. I think it's probably more like the commentary, but I mean, sometimes it does get into terms like that. That's true, but I don't know. I'm trying to keep it kind of conversational.
It's been a long time, and Lord knows people have been itching to have something like this out of you. What kind of made you decide? What made you decide to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, right. And I maybe that was the moment when it suddenly came to me, and I almost felt like, wait, wasn't that this was supposed to be the first thing? Wait, wait a minute, what? In other words, why now of all times? Well, now, I did start this about a year ago. So, and at that time, I felt like it would be part of a long goodbye to Gene Wolfe. I mean, I had no idea his end was coming quite so soon. That I wasn't thinking in those terms, but it just seemed like it was, I don't know, the time seemed to be right to embark on this thing. And even though it was strangely formed, and I kept refining it even as I was working on it. But, it was also a great excuse to just go ahead and read the whole thing again.
That's exactly why we're doing this podcast.
I understand that.
Yeah. It's like, you're going to do it anyway, so you might as well, And as I was going, it was really an interesting project. A lot of things really solidified, things that became clear to me that had been very unclear before. Suddenly everything was just kind of sliding together and locking up. And then, there were some things I discovered. See, that's the thing, is there are a few things I discovered that I thought were so great that's why I thought everything should be just like that. And so my original idea for the back cover was, look, I'll just give you the hint and I'll give you the answer. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, then don't even pick up this book. I was really going to be like that about it,
Mantis the jerk.
Yeah. See, that's the problem. It comes out the wrong way is the thing. And so I was thinking, oh man, that's not good. And then I decided, can we kind of do the opposite, And then I also realized, well, you know what? I bet 99% of the people who even enjoy this thing are not going to think that thing is the greatest thing in the whole thing, So I was like, okay, let's just go away from that and try to make it more. So then it was like, well, is that it? Is this the lexicon with training wheels? Is that what this is? And it's kind of like, well, no, actually, it doesn't really use that much of the lexicon. And that, at first you think, oh, this will be easy. It'll be a weekend, But no, it's not really like that. It's quite different.
It is funny though. I mean, it's nice to have, it's amazing to have a book that lets you return to it that way. Like I know, I don't know how many times I've read it, but just wanting to get back into it in that much detail. Like, we joke that's how this started, because I had told James I was going to reread it, and he's like, well, let's just record our conversations and we'll see what happens.
Exactly.
But then other people have finished, like I know the other podcast, Al Zabo Soup, just finished New Sun, and other people have told me, oh, this is perfect timing, because now I just get an excuse to start over. And, it's wonderful that there's something that people return to that much.
And what's really interesting is that, we're doing the same book. And we're doing it kind of the same way, right? Chapter by chapter. But the number of people who say that, what we do is different.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the nature of the book.
But I love that you're able to do that. And like you said, you've done the lexicon, which kind of did a whole lot of groundwork for everyone. But now to return to it and still be a similar thing, but in a different way. And it totally makes sense. It still is something that I think you're going to get definitely a lot of people.
Well, the thing, first off, just in a selfish way, what a blessing that I can read this book and still love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's what we're all saying. One has a little fear, like, well, maybe this time I've finally outgrown it or something, or I don't know, and yet, oh man, wow, and I don't know, it's just that thing, like. People who don't like it, well, it's just hard to explain. But just the whole thing where, first of all, you have to get rid of all those bad reading habits of skimming and all those speed reading tricks, all that stuff. You have to chuck it and just really, I don't know. You have to adopt a different strategy, more like when you were first learning to read or something. And And then, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of those skills make, frankly, a lot of genre fiction readable and enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take them to this book, you're gonna wonder what the big deal is about.
Exactly. And that's what I think when Neil Gaiman, his beautiful forward to that folio edition, mm-hmm. which then he used kind of as a eulogy for Gene mm-hmm. Wolfe after his passing, where he says pretty much straight up, Gene Wolfe taught me how to read. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly it. That it's not how to read like as a child, but the way to do it. You have to slow it down. You have to pay attention. And then, yeah, it all just, I don't know, it opens up in these. Yeah.
And then reread it again.
Do you mind if I ask, do you remember how you got interested in Wolfe? I mean, if I remember we were talking about this ourselves, and I had just always kind of known his name from magazines and the short stories. And so he was just kind of in the air, and it slowly became something that I was like, oh, you should be reading New Sun. And I remember that's kind of how it eventually was made to me. But do you remember for yourself what some of your early?
Oh, absolutely. Because I was in high school, I had a part-time job at a bookstore, and I took one look at those covers and I said, oh, great, another gore series.
That's kind of like
I said, this is just what the genre needs, another, John Norman gore series. So I was immediately, I just said, forget it. I'm not at all interested. But I kept going around. At that time, I was in my Jack Vance phase, and people said, hey, wait a minute, you like Jack Vance? It's like, yeah. It's like, you like The Dying Earth? I said, yeah. And they said, oh man, you got to read this. I said, really? Like, come on, really? And then, yeah, I started reading it, and it was just really, really good. And then I had to wait. I mean, because I had to wait for books to come out, because the first 4 books weren't even out yet, right? I think the first 2 were out. Mm-hmm. So that's how it started. And then I was so while I was waiting for the other books to come out, I started scouring the place for just everything else. And so I read Peace, I read Island of Dr. Death and other stories, and stuff like that.
No, I understand. I still wish I could meet someone who read Shadow of the Torture and then read Claw, and what they felt like after about 4 or 5 chapters in the Claw. And just to be like, wait a minute, you didn't finish the story that started in the last one. I mean, I guess, although we've been talking about it, whether or not, if you're a close reader, maybe you did realize that the story ended because Gurlos told you. But I've always wondered, I mentioned that because I'm actually in a reading group with some people who are reading it for the first time right now, and they kind of asked me to come through. And when we finished Shadow and started Claw, they were pissed off. They were like, we ended on a cliffhanger, and yet we get no.
Think of people who waited a year for that book to come out, and
that's what I mean. The people who had to wait.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's just something so, I don't know. For me, that didn't bother me that much, because it was just so, you have that cliffhanger, and then what do? You open up on a dream sequence.
Yeah.
And then in that dream, you can kind of see through the mirror darkly, you can kind of see something that happened on the other side of the gate. And then he wakes up. And then you just have that beautiful, it's just so great. And it's so, I don't know, so masterful. So, it's like, I'm not going to waste your time with a bunch of hand holding or whatever. And, and yet that's that strange tension. How can you be so philosophical and Proustian and yet insist that you're not going to go off on hand-holding tangents or something? And it's like, because the tangents are really going to actually be a lot more work than that is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, nobody quotes, the plot elements. No one talks. I mean, the plot elements are insane. I mean, if you actually just sit down and describe the things that happen in these books, no one would believe someone put that in the same book. Whereas we'll put them within a couple chapters, and just one after the other, or crazy things that happen, huge amounts of plot that happen within a single day. No one quotes those. They quote the times when Severian stops and just thinks.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. And in fact, that aspect, James, that's a good point. And I should have talked about that a little bit more in this new book. So maybe this is like bonus material now, is to just say that I think a lot of that comes from Walpole's novel that invented the Gothic novel. That's Castle of Otranto. And the thing about that, it's exactly what it is. It's so like, it's like he's actually doing a very sly parody, because everything is so exaggerated. Everything is so intense, and he's throwing in so many motifs, and it's kind of ridiculous, except that it is being propelled by its own incredible energy. You kind of can't believe he's able to pull this off. And that launched the whole Gothic novel. And as I look at other novels that came after it, and I see how they more or less failed to do what Walpole did, because it doesn't, they're taking it too seriously in a way. He has that impish, which again, as soon as I say impish, you think of Gene Wolfe right there, just, okay, I'm going to take all these off the shelf things and just, crank it all up to 11 and we'll just see what happens, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Even that, if you are not a close reader, if you're just skimming, forget about it, because so much happens within a page.
But maybe if we want to focus it a little bit, you talked a lot about the first chapter. Is there another favorite part of yours, either sentimental or not, from before he gets exiled that was particularly fun when you were writing the book?
We had known, like I mentioned before, the whole Great Expectation thing. But when we have the chapter with the dog,
yes,
when he meets the young woman we later learn is Valeria, that actually maps so closely to Great Expectations. I hadn't really anticipated, and so it was a joy to show that by big block quotes, to just show it is mapping.
Oh yeah,
and it is just so cool. There's an example where, and you don't normally, when you're thinking about the dog chapter, you're thinking about, a boy and his dog, as you excellently pointed out, but it ends with this wonderful first meeting of the two, which is just like the first meeting, even down to the point of talking about the different languages and stuff. So here, I'll just read it to you. Okay, so.
Oh yeah, no, in fact, I'm over here looking things
up. Okay, so but no, Estella, as yet unnamed, guides Pip toward the place she calls Manor House. Is that the name of this house, miss? One of its names, boy. It has more than one, miss? One more. Its other name was Stasis, which is Greek, or Latin, or Hebrew, or all three, or all one to me, for enough. Enough house, said I. That's a curious name, miss. Okay. So then Estella leads him to a strange interview with Miss Havisham, the mistress of the house. And after a few pages, Pip notes, "It was then I began to understand that everything in the room had stopped, like the watch and the clock, a long time ago. I noticed that Miss Havisham put down the jewel exactly on the spot from which she had taken it up. As Estella cut the cards, I glanced at the dressing table again and saw that the shoe upon it, once white, now yellow, had never been worn. I glanced down at the foot from which the shoe was absent and saw that the silk stocking on it, once white, now yellow, had been trodden ragged. Without this arrest of everything, this standing still of all the pale, decayed objects, not even the withered bridal dress on the collapsed form could have looked so like grave clothes, or the long veil so like a shroud." So there you go. A place of halted time a place's name and dead languages all figure in the exchange between Severian and Valeria.
Well,
so isn't that neat?
That's really neat. So is Valeria Estella or Miss Havisham? That's what I want to know.
Neither. She's Olivia from 12th Night.
But no, that absolutely tracks. Yeah, that's wonderful. That makes so much sense. I keep coming back more and more. I remember in one of his interviews, Wolfe talks about how whenever he was stuck, he would go and pull out a piece of great literature and see if he could just, borrow some of the style or redo it in a sci-fi sense, just to take a look. And I think that may have been underplaying what he was actually doing, but at the same time, there's a lot to that, and not quite so random as he described it, but to take a lot of those things and then retell them fits so well with so many different images, but also, to be honest, fits so well with what so much of New Sun is doing with how stories get retold and remeshed and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the whole idea of taking these fossilized bits of literature and making a new art with it.
So what was your biggest surprise in this reread to write this book?
Well, you know what it was. you know what I was going to put on the back cover. So, but that's not until much later. That's not until the fourth book.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was something that had puzzled all of us for a long, long, long time, and then it kind of came to me, and I kind of couldn't believe it, and then it was like, oh man! So that's the one that I just feel that's the crown jewel. But yeah, other people will be like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, the trouble is that we all have our own theories, and so we're never enamored. Someone brings out some gold from.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
And then we all say, well, yeah, but how does that work with mine? So.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's a very utilitarian thing. Like, how well does it work with my particular thing? And it's like, it doesn't work at all, so get out of here.
Except for when you do find those explanations or that where things just all of a sudden click into place. Like, I have to admit, there are with some of the short stories that I'd read forever, and then I read Mark Aramini's book on the stories, and some of the things that he had figured out in there, it was like so clear. It was like, oh well, that's great. Unfortunately, I feel like it solved it was so clear. It was so clear. I was like, now I know what's going on in that story, and I can't think of it a different way now. So, but no, I mean, that happens all the time with Wolfe, with certain ways of looking at things where what I think other people might take as a theory, like if I find one that really does explain something, it clicks and I can't see it any other way.
Well, the truth is that happens to me all the time. All of these stories, they change in your hand. I feel like Neil Gaiman said that once about it, is the way that they change over time. And you think you really understand it. And then you'll read it 10 years later and you say, oh, no. So
one thing I should know, is this book, does it include Urth, or is it just the 4 books? It does have Urth.
Oh, it does Urth, and it also has the 4 shorter works too.
Okay.
So it also has The God and His Man, Empires of Foliage and Flower, The Cat.
Oh, that's really great.
Map.
Oh, great.
I just didn't want to clutter up the title for it because it was already getting long with this whole Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun 8-chapter guide. But yeah, it is actually all the New Sun material. Yeah, and a little bit more about the structure. So it goes through like that, so volume by volume. And then at the end of the Book of the New Sun, it has an area which is kind of like, this is the part that's kind of like little short essays. And they're called postludes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is postludes for the Book of the New Sun. So there's, 3 or 4 of them. And so these are kind of what you were mentioning before about longer form, but they're not very long. And then goes into the shorter works, because I put the shorter works between the Book of the New Sun and Urth the New Sun. That seemed like the place to tuck the shorter works.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's the shorter works, and then there's a single postlude for the shorter works. And then there's Urth of the New Sun. And then after Urth of the New Sun, there's some postludes for the Urth of the New Sun. So that's kind of where the essays, they're not really big essays, but they're more like essays than most of the
How
other.
terrible for you, because now you have to do all the other books.
So any difference this time with, did you notice any, I'm trying to think if there's a question here, but I still have in my head a huge gap between Urth and the first volumes, just if for nothing else in terms of style in which they're written, which is obviously there. But when you were doing it this time, in your mind, are they pretty well integrated, or do you still feel like there's not just a stylistic difference, but any super important differences between Urth and the rest of it?
I think what you're talking about, the way that I see that is I compare it to, there's the series, the Alexandria Quartet. Mm-hmm. It was a really famous series. And the idea there was you had these 4 books, and the way that the author said that the first 3, each one did a different dimension. So it's like width, length, and height. Mm-hmm. But the 4th one was introducing time. And I think, so that means that the first 3, they're kind of like still life in a way. Mm-hmm. And they're all interrelated to each other. So you're seeing the same thing, in this case, Alexandria, from a slightly different angle, which helps to flesh out certain things and like that. But then when you get to the 4th book, now suddenly it's time. So you see the effect of time changing. It's no longer still life. Now it's like a motion picture. And I think that's how I've taken Urth. So if it has that difference, that's why, because it's like that. Mm-hmm. It's moving ahead. I'm just so impressed by the big twist, the different reveals, the way that it becomes so puzzling, mm-hmm. even as it's propelling into this different direction. So I really like it a lot, and I think that it adds the dimension of time that the others are kind of have a sort of a still life quality to mm-hmm. them.
Yeah, I see that. I definitely see that. Yeah. It also struck me the last time I read it, how similar it is to Short Sun in the way it's told. At least it seems to me that it's almost like the Short Sun narrator is very similar to the Severian in Urth of the New Sun. Mm-hmm. More ways than I had expected to see, because I always felt like I got a lot of Urth and I felt like I didn't get a lot of Short Sun, so I was sort of surprised by that. But yeah, as I reread Urth this time, that was something that stood out to me.
How much do you think Gene changed his mind about the story between the Book of the New Sun and the Urth of the New Sun?
That's really a fascinating question. I mean, since he hadn't planned on doing it, that's really interesting. It's hard to guess. I mean, we poke around with looking at what was the original novella when the whole thing was just going to mm-hmm. be a novella. We can look at that and kind of figure that out. But if he thought that the book was complete as it was, and then gets into this argument with David Hartwell and everything, and it seems like at that point the challenge is, okay, he has to answer every question that David Hartwell has. He has, in other words, he's calling the bluff. David Hartwell's saying, I don't think you got it. I think you're just, making it all up or something.
Well, there's some things we can figure out here. Like after when Urth comes out, okay, you can now look at Book of the New Sun. You can see, okay, yeah, he planned that there would be a flood, right? You can look at that and see.
Yeah.
You can say,
it sure looks like it.
And he must have had something in his mind about the Severian version in the Old City. And but the rest of it, Like in the original novella, so you have this story. It's basically the same story. A torturer's apprentice falls in love with a client, has to decide whether to betray his family or save this woman. He doesn't save her, but then he shows mercy, and that's as much a betrayal of his family as before. He gets exiled, and then we see that this ends, he's the master of the guild. And this is kind of like that, except that, well, wait a minute, how did he get back and be the master of the guild? And so he kind of answers some of those questions. But if he was answering Hartwell's questions, Hartwell wasn't asking any of the questions I was asking. So
well, hang on. But back to the original novella, it seems like he finds out that he gets the letter from Thekla, and because she is still alive, and she does apologize. And then that's the real problem, is like now he's in the pickle. And so it seems like, I mean, Gene Wolfe doesn't say exactly, but it's strongly suggested that, yeah, he has to kill her and eat her. And that's why it's called the Feast of St. Catherine, because he kills her and eats her. And now she's permanently in the cells of his body, and he can enjoy her whenever he wants. So, I mean, obviously that's a much darker kind of a thing. And you end up doing the same thing. It's just with different motivations.
Yeah. Now, what was the actual timeline for writing Urth? That's what I'm not sure of, because I've tried to look back at the interviews and what he explains, but he knew he was going to have to write Urth before Citadel was actually published. Isn't that right? Am I right that part of the deal of getting Sword and Citadel split into 2 books was that he would have to agree to write Urth? I remember reading that somewhere, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. And the only reason I ask is because if that's true, then there's certainly all kinds of things he still could have done in at least Citadel with an eye towards what might have to come in the next book. Because I think there's in one interview where, as he tells it, after Citadel was published, then he had to do it. But I was thinking there's something else where I feel like he mentions that it was kind of part of the deal he hashed out with Hartwell or whoever the publisher was, that he would work on a sequel after, if he got to split Citadel into 2 books, then it was going to be part of the deal to write another one. Do you know?
No, I don't. My sense, I haven't been looking into it, but my sense is that it was after stuff was already published that this kind of came up. But you're right, because you're right. It must have been before the publication of Citadel, because the part that I'm remembering where David Hartwell is saying, look, we'll just put on a little PS where it says, then the new sun came and everything was wonderful. And he was just like, no, you're not going to do that. And then they had a huge fight. I mean, and if he's willing to admit it was a huge fight, it must have been must have been. And then it's like, well, okay, then what? And then he sits there for a few minutes. It's like, okay, I can do it in one more book. But it was after the thing. So as far as he was concerned, no, it's done. It's, what do you... No, you're not going to put a PS. And the thing is that it's so funny, because I know exactly what David Hartwell, well, I can imagine I know what David Hartwell is thinking, because there's the science fiction book, Davy, by Edgar Pangborn, that is just like that, where it's told like it's a first person narrative, and it does end with a kind of a, well, now we're going off of here, who knows what. And then there is a little PS written by like the next person who picks up the logbook or whatever. So in other words, you can have that cliffhanger for the hero, and yet you can still have a little additional, oh, well, that didn't work out, or whatever kind of a thing at the end, just so that you have some resolution. But yeah, I mean, since we know Gene Wolfe's vision is far different from what everything was being presented within the Book of the Sun. So yeah, it's completely like 180 degrees off. I mean,
Well, he had a very exceptional idea about endings. I mean, that wasn't the only thing that wasn't the only ending that he and Hartwell fought about, right? I remember thinking about Counting Cats in Zanzibar, a short story that I think that, as far as I can determine, is only dear to my heart of Wolfe's short stories. But he has this one where at the end, okay, you have to be quiet, anybody who's listening. If you haven't read it, just skip ahead about a minute. But he has, the ending is that, they throw her off the boat, and a shark says something like, "Hi, Toots," and I think Hartwell thought that was a little too light, and but Gene kind of insisted on that.
Yeah, he did insist on it, but I don't think it was Hartwell. I think it was the editor of the magazine. I think it was the editor. I might be able to name the name, but why bother? It's just that somebody said, "Well, can we do something with that?" And the answer is no.
It's the perfect ending.
It's like, that's the point of the whole exercise is right there. It's like, no, we can't change that.
Well, one thing I'm curious, and this is maybe selfish, but I I got turned on to John Crowley from you and from the small press and people on the Urth-list. And you already mentioned Jack Vance. Are there other writers who you would love to spend this much time working on, but you just haven't had the chance?
I tend to do that when I find something. So like, I really like the novel Roadside Picnic, which was made into the movie Stalker. And so I wrote a bunch of essays and then collected that in a small book. So I'm wildly enthusiastic about that. I really like The King in Yellow.
That's kind of had a renaissance. I guess mostly due to the True Detective,
yeah.
which by the way, I was kind of disappointed. I think they had this big lead up. I thought, oh, The King in Yellow, okay, and then they just did. Not only did they not do anything with it, but then they had all the characters kind of betray the entire story up till then. But
yeah, I hear you. And yet, in a sense, on the artistic side, I thought maybe that's a solid way of dealing with it. Just leave it as an enigmatic kind of a thing, rather than, that was a good series. That was, I don't know, but yeah. So yeah, that's the thing is, if I find something, I do tend to work on it. Then just the whole thing with John Crowley, and I mean, just that was another Alice story, because I would talk with her and we'd be talking along, and I'd say, I'd make some John Crowley reference, and she'd just get this blank look on her face. And I always say, "That's right. You've never read any John Crowley. I keep forgetting that." And she's like, "Well, I guess I have to." It's like, no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't know why, but it just seems like you would be the perfect, And so then, when she got into it, she was just really, so that was a funny case where I didn't mean to, pressure her, badger her into it. It just seems like so natural. And then sure enough, when she got into it, she took to it like a duck to water.
And just so, if for people who don't know, that was another one of your Serious Press publications, was a book of essays on John Crowley.
Actually, that's a little more complicated. Serious Fiction did the chapbook form, and then we built it up into a book, and that was done by somebody else. So somebody else did the book. Yeah, I mean, that was just, all of these things are a tremendous amount of work. And you get somebody like Alice Turner involved, and it's like, man, I was working really hard. And it was just like, oh man, I got to get somebody else to do this kind of a thing. So
did she function as an editor, or, because I know that was kind of her job? Okay.
Oh yes, she did. Oh yes. And more than that, she also rounded up people. She went out and got, so she did a tremendous amount of work. Yeah. And she found the publisher. I mean, she did all that stuff. I just did the chapbook, but actually I say just, but we actually did. First, there was the first chapbook, and then the second chapbook. It's just kind of monstrous thing. It just kept growing and growing, and so I was getting pretty worn out from it all. But she just tremendous amount of energy. She had all the contacts. She would just ask me questions, and then she'd just go out there and find people. And yeah, once she was on the John Crowley wavelength, and she was surprised to find out all these people around her were, oh yeah, I totally know about, oh yeah, I'd love to write something. And so, so it was just stuff was going on. So, yeah, that was really something. But wow, the production still, I mean, I got out of a lot of it, but there was still a lot of stuff I had to do. It was like, oh man.
Well, I do know that, I appreciate all that work, and I know tons of people, all the things that Serious Fiction did, your early chapbooks, both for New Sun and Long Sun and Wizard Knight. I mean, in addition to, of course, right, Lexicon, but I mean, that, I feel like, you were the first wave of people trying to make, I mean, honestly, I feel like that made a lot of Wolfe more accessible to a lot of people.
Well, thank you for your kind words.
No, I mean, truly, I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who turned to Lexicon, and because they had that, were able to go further with New Sun than they might have. They might have read it and then been like, that was fun, but it was kind of confusing. But because of all that, I feel like it made a lot of people take him a lot more seriously, just because they had time.
Well, so. Thank you. And like I was describing this new thing, I really hope this new thing will allow people who've either been just put off by the, like we say, aura of difficulty or something, and if they want to have this, I hope that does bring a new group of people that are curious, especially now with his passing. Now he's all in the news, and people are talking about him, and maybe that could help them along in such a way. But we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I still go back to Lexicon Urthus and find things discover things that that I hadn't known. I kind of anticipate this new book will be like that. I mean, on chapter, what was it? Chapter 4 with Triskela, I read in the commentary, oh, look, this quote comes from 12th Night, and well, now I know, now I understand. So
yeah, and that set you off on your new crazy thing. Like,
yay! I always need a new one.
Okay, so here's a thing, Ben. I was being kind of vague before about how certain things that were always nebulous to me are suddenly just like rock solid and clear. So and we were talking about the lexicon. So let's talk about, in the first edition, I got a lot of flack for my talking about Kim Lee's song, right?
Right.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about Kim Lee's song. This is my new interpretation. Okay.
Curiositas.
Okay. So the thing is, Kim Lee's song, we know because Jonas says it was a common name back when he was a boy. So it's a common name. In other words, it's not that it's an unusual name. It is an unusual name now in Severian's time, but back then it was a common name. So it's not necessarily a name we would recognize. But here's the point that I wasn't grasping before. It's a common name that Jonas recognizes. He knew that guy. He knew Kim Lee's song. He knew him because they were on that same ship. And so then when the little girl talks about, when they buried the navigator, remember, we all love that part. When they buried everybody wore black when they buried the navigator. The navigator was Kim Lee's song. He was the one. He's the one guy from the same ship that Jonas was on that came back and crashed.
Oh.
He's his old friend, the navigator. And
you know what? That actually okay. Yeah.
So I had, at times I thought maybe Kim Lee's song is like the name of Hethor, because Hethor also has a name that we don't really know, a hidden name. Mm-hmm. I thought all sorts of things. I thought, in fact, in the lexicon as it stands, I traced those parts where it seems like, Hethor and Jonas had served on the same ship. No, Severian suspects that, but no, they did not. I don't think they did. They're from the same era, but the thing is that Jonas went up in a rocket ship and came back in a rocket ship, and the port wasn't there anymore. That's why they crashed. The port is gone. The port is Citadel Hill. So they crashed. But we know that ships still come, but now they come by sail. So what happened is, during the Galactic Empire period, the rocket ships were being used. But then it transitioned to the sails that don't need the port. The sails can land anywhere, apparently. And so that's why Jonas comes back to the old home world, and there's not even a port. And then they crash, and he gets damaged and then repaired with biological material, and then the crew scatters. And he's not really clear until he meets the descendants. He's not really aware how long he's been walking around in the Commonwealth.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
But it's been over 140 years.
Or something, yeah. Well, that actually clarifies it, because when I was rereading Claw actually just recently, it struck me that I was confused. Like, why does Jonas then freak out? Like, because he starts to have his breakdown. And I was like, he's known that he's back. He talks about, he knows all this stuff. And so I was trying to figure out, well, what about coming to the antechamber? What happens that actually makes him flip out? That would make sense, because he finally sort of has this sort of self-realization, of how long he's just been wandering. That would make sense, because otherwise I'm like, he knows what he is. He knows about that this is Earth, but in the future. But it's not the fact that it's not the sort of relativity travel that's messed with him. It's more, it's that, right? It's that he's spent all this time since he crashed, and it's all finally coming.
And here was that he finds the traces of his friend in his own memory. And it's like finding your friend is like in a block of amber or something, where it's like you've got his descendants. Like, while you were wandering, he got stuck in this tar pit and had these babies, and then the babies had babies, and so on. But Craig, I'm with you, and this is another part that I it's sort of more bonus material. Because what you're talking about, there is something I need to push a little more. There's something about the antechamber, the structure of it, that is freaking him out. And he says to Severian, don't you recognize it? And the question is he tripping out that he thinks that Severian was on the rocket ship? Or does he know, since Severian is from the place where all the rocket ships are, that he might know from lore, there's something about the structure. It's somehow connected. It's somehow connected to the old port, which means what? Is this ground control? Is this mission control? Because it's got to be away from the blast site. That's the first rule. It can't be anywhere near the danger area. So maybe his thing is like, don't you recognize this? This is, it's that kind of a thing. Like, can't you tell from the architecture? Doesn't this just like remind you of home? And Severian's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, but there's something where he seems to be thinking Severian should recognize it more than he does, because he doesn't recognize it at all. So there's that weird sense that maybe the navigator, and it might be because he's the navigator, found his way back to mission control, and then they popped him into the antechamber.
And Jonas does seem pretty confident when he's looking for the mirrors, right? When they're wandering around. He seems to be, and I know that would be something different, but he does seem... He seems
confident when he sees the weird symbols.
Right.
That seems to be the earlier writing form. He's almost like saying, I can read that. And Severian's like,
But no, that's wonderful, because that makes a lot more sense, and actually puts a path to figuring out what was Jonas. Because when I reread it this time, I was like, I had been making these assumptions about Jonas and what he was realizing, but I realized I didn't know what it was. But I love that.
Oh.
Now I have something.
All right, here's another one. Here's another one. We were always wondering about the wall of Nessus and why it was built, and how does it relate to the story of the woman with a handful of beans.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And we argued about this for so long. But now it seems very clear to me. And again, this is Jonas is talking. And so you read Jonas's story, and if you read it as being, because Severian kind of understands that this is personal history. So Jonas is saying, the hill was where the port was. And, the rulers of that day were far worse, than the autarch. Mm-hmm. And everybody was just going along until this woman came down and said, you're going to do what I say, or I'm going to put these in the ocean. And they had her just ripped into bits. But then talk about how many cliffhangers does that cliffhanger have, right? Because then his story gets interrupted. But the reason why he's telling that story is because Talos has just been revving up the fear factor for the women by telling them, ooh, scary, scary, ooh, scary, scary, right? And he's already fallen in love with the one woman. So he's trying to say, look, actually, I know what this is about. So here's the thing. He was there when the wall was built. See, again, that shows how he was there when the wall was built. And then when he came back, the port wasn't even there anymore. So he's saying the reason why it was built, I'm claiming here, is because of that woman, that they said, all right, that was a close call. Next time somebody comes with black beans, we might not be able to catch it so fast. So we have to have this containment wall around it. And everybody is watching for those black beans. So that's all they're watching for, the black beans. It's as simple as that. And it's as antiquated as that too. And that's why he's trying to tell that to the women, saying, don't worry, they've been doing this since before the first autarch. They're looking for a very specific contraband, and quite honestly, it's not going to happen because, well, he could even go further and say, if anybody wanted to land that, they don't have to land at the port anymore, so the whole world gets blown up anyway.
Right.
It's all built on it being the port as the only entry point. See, that's part of his story. That's why when he comes back and there's no port, they have to crash it. But so there was only one port, and this is the containment ring around it. And these beast men are there 24/7 watching for black beans.
Keeping things in rather than keeping things out.
Exactly. See, exactly. And that's why it has nothing to do with Abaya, Erebus, all that stuff. Absolutely nothing. It's all about keeping it in. And which means it's not about protecting Nessus. Nessus could be the collateral damage that's required to save the rest of the planet. It's like if things go bad, then we'll just, liquidate everything to save the whole world.
That puts pieces together. Now, I still have to admit, I always assumed that the beans were something about Undines or Erebus or Abaya or something like that. I mean, just because she says, I'm going to throw them in the water. And then, so I guess the other part where he could be saying, don't worry about it anymore is basically. So whatever they're looking for, they found a different way to get there.
Yeah. No, I too, I remember that was part of our thinking in the way back. And the first time I ever read it, my first reaction was, I thought it was Ice 9 from Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle.
Yeah, exactly. So, but let's see, when was Ice 9? When was Cat's Cradle published?
In the 60s.
Yeah, so he was, yeah.
Wait, spell that one out for me, because I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay, well, the idea of Cat's Cradle is that he has this little bit of liquid, and that when you put it in the water, it causes all the water to cause a chain reaction. All the water freezes.
Yeah, okay. It turns into this substance called Ice 9. And so when they, then the mad scientist decides, okay, fine, we're just going to end the world by chucking it into the ocean. And then there you go. It just freezes up everything.
Okay.
So that's how a handful of black beans, it has a lot of great fairy tale and mythological stuff to it. Mm-hmm. But on the genre side, I always thought, oh yeah, that's Ice Nine. but like we're saying, the point is, she says, I'm going to chuck it into the ocean. And they're like, no, you're not. In other words, she's not saying, oh, I'll chuck it into the river. She has to get it over to the ocean. And so they're like, okay, they managed to tear her up to bits. And then they're like, okay, now we're just going to put a big old containment wall. So if anybody with the stuff trying to go out, then we're just going to do the same thing.
But the wall still kind of bothers me because it's only on one side, right? He doesn't have to do that when he's coming in from the south.
No, it's there. It's in the south. Oh. When he comes in from the south, though, he's in the boat on the river, so we have no idea what it's like.
Well, Talus has said, because remember, James, we were talking
about
names
There's
of the
two
gates
of them down there.
Yeah, there are all the other gates. That's true. Yeah. So they must be.
Yeah.
But if you can just sail your boat down the river, then it's a pretty shoddy wall.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely more interesting because I've been definitely thinking about, the tall wall in order to stop Undines coming up and attacking the city, which we know they can't really stand up anyway. So which wouldn't make sense, but that would be better.
Yeah. Well, and when you consider how much land is between the walls and any sea to the north, I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as far as protecting yourself from Abaya.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And I think this is just another example of just showing how you have people that are still doing their job long after. Yeah. I mean, it's like people are just on autopilot. Like it doesn't even apply anymore. And yet all that structure is still in place because, well, it's built to last, both in the physical sense of the wall and in the biological sense of all the critters inside of it. So they're all just kind of chugging along, even though there's no purpose to it. And like I say, he's trying to tell the story to calm the women down. And then what do you know? A riot breaks out. And it's like the worst possible thing. Just when you're trying to say, oh, there's nothing, it's all fine. And then there's this total mayhem going on. And yeah, like you say, then that becomes that cliffhanger. You're trying to figure out, well, what happened anyway? I mean, who knows? Well,
I think I know. It didn't. And I think Wolfe kind of explained it at some point. This will show, and I shall explain it at the last chapter of Shadow of the Torturer. But Wolfe kind of says, and I'm sure that Wolfe, when he wrote that ending, thought that if someone just thought a little bit, that it would be obvious, which is so typical. So.
Yeah, there you go.
I just want to go back and read Claw now. I'm going to have to stay up late and reread Jonas chapters.
Yay!
So your book comes out on November 11th. Is that right?
Yes.
It's been off at the way these things work. It must have been at the publishers for a long time. How did you keep it under wraps? I haven't heard anyone talk about any review copies or.
I know, because that's how crazy this is. Well, this is where we are. This is what we're doing.
We're just going to do it. So don't worry about the process.
It's sausage making all the way down. Yeah, no, it's a very chaotic thing. And, like I said, I didn't anticipate much of a schedule for doing it. And then he died like that, and that altered things in a way. But it wasn't until like mid-September that I suddenly said, "Hey, wait a minute! I better really get this together."
So, but yeah, now that I always kind of thought that at some point he was going to bequeath his papers to somebody to put together the Silmarillion of the new sun, so they would kind of describe all the backstory that he self-evidently had designed in.
I don't have any information on that at all.
Well,
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't have any information.
Mark had mentioned something about trying to find out
that the papers were all going to the what was it, University of Illinois?
One of the branches, one of the campuses. And I have to admit, part of me, with the way that Wolfe talked about drafting all the time, part of me was just was like, I will find an excuse to go look in there and see what's available if he kept anything. I mean, I don't know what's
still. I mean, it sounds like worth a try, no matter what,
Oh yeah, but I mean, so many. I mean, looking at drafts of well-known things is obviously something that scholarship does all the time, but particularly with Wolfe, it seems like it would be so fun to know if, for example, his first drafts kind of spelled things out, and then as he drafted, he would decide what's going to be surface story, what's going to be implied, what was a story that got turned into something implied. That would be fascinating. So, I mean, it would take some of the fun out of, the figuring and the wondering and the theorizing, but at the same time, I would love to know a little bit more about his process that way. And
yeah, exactly, to see him actually work.
But there's still so much in there as far as the books. I mean, no one stops and says, "Oh gosh, we know so much about Lord of the Rings. I guess I'll never read that book again."
Oh yeah, yeah. If they do, it's still, I have to admit, part of me is still feeling a bit about like it's too soon. Like I don't want the secrets, but at the same time, the part of me that, honestly, even though I met him a couple times, I never knew him personally. So it's the more texts. I mean, if we're not going to get any more novels, at least if we can get versions and drafts, that would be wonderful. Although we are getting one more novel, right?
Yeah.
We are getting Interlibrary Loan.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, James, how many times you and I met him together a bunch of times? That must have been like, was it three or four times?
At least twice that you and I had met him.
Okay, no, at least three, because there was Chicago,
in Seattle,
and twice in Chicago,
and in Chicago,
because one was WindyCon, and then the other one was at the mansion.
Yeah, right. That's true. So yeah,
3 times,
probably 3 times.
So I think I only met him about 7 times. Yeah, we had some fun. And just sharing meals with him and stuff.
Yeah, well, WindyCon was definitely the best way to talk to Wolfe, because he was just a local over there. No one seemed to be paying attention. You'd see him standing in the hall, kind of pushing Rosemary in her wheelchair and kind of deciding which way he was going to go, and all by himself. Whereas, like, if you met him, if you saw him at Dragon Con or any other bigger cons, he was a rock star. You couldn't get anywhere near him. He was so, I've said it before, is that he was as nice as you would have wanted him to be. It wasn't going to be a case of where you met him and you're going to be disappointed by your heroes.
Funny guy. He was.
Yeah, he would. I saw a panel of him once, and he was the only one. And people don't know what to ask him. They're afraid to ask him because they're afraid he'll just say he won't answer the question. And so, he would ask himself questions. So have I ever told you about the time I almost blew myself up? Yeah, well, this was really good.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh no. Yeah. And we'll do it again sometime. I'm sure we'll figure it out.
No, but thank you so much for talking and for coming on, and honestly too, for listening. It's kind of fun that, we had no idea who would actually listen to us just ramble. So we're thrilled. But no, when he told me, he's like, "Hey, guess what? Michael sent me an email and he listened to the thing and he responded." I was like, "Oh, wow." But thanks for doing this.
Yes.
And I mean, honestly, thank you for the books. Thank you for the writing and the work that you've done.
Well, you are very welcome. Thank you for your kind words.
All right, everybody repeat after me. You slop the beans in the cup.
You slop the beans in the cup.
You throw the rice on top.
You throw the rice on top.
Go on and stir it up.
Go on and stir it up.
To make your taste buds pop.
To make your taste buds pop.
You slop the beans in the the cup, you throw the rice on top of the black beans. Black beans.
Yay! 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 Yay!